No, I'm not going to argue that we should make prisons look like this. What I am going to argue is that in places that look like the upper left-hand part of the screen, we should have a massive program of state and federal intervention to teach college courses through college graduation degrees. Years ago, I was a prosecutor, and I retain some of the enthusiasm of a prosecutor to control crime. College education in prison will help control crime. It'll also save tax money. Most important, it will support a core American value. Abraham Lincoln said, "This is a country conceived in liberty." Declaration of Independence includes liberty as one of our inalienable rights. And according to the Constitution, in its preamble, the purpose of that document was to secure to ourselves and our posterity the blessings of liberty. Part of our posterity, part of that posterity, is not doing very well in the Liberty Department. I want you to think of a small city. Manchester, New Hampshire, without its suburbs, is a little bigger than 100,000 in population. How many of its citizens, on average, do you think are incarcerated at any one moment? The answer is 756. How does that compare to our neighbors and to other liberal democracies? Not very well. Who are our peers when it comes to incarceration? Countries that we do not normally want to model ourselves upon. The distribution of this incarceration across our population is very unequal. This dramatic chart would not appear significantly different today with our different administration. I owe this slide and some other work to my student, Joseph Kim, who had done some prior work in the same topic. Today, the top of that curve might possibly drop down a little in the last 2 years. That's because of emergency legislations in the states brought on by their fiscal crises that led to some early release programs. But this is probably a temporary effect. The secular trend is clear and very scary. What have our politicians been doing while prison population has been growing so explosively? Well, they've made a number of new crimes. They've increased maximum penalties, and they've taken away from judges their discretion to give lower penalties. Might work. Maybe if we make penalties stiff enough, we can deter our way out of the problem. This is what we think that a typical deterrence curve looks like for a criminal offense. Over in the left side, where penalties are small, you get a good increase in deterrence when you increase the penalty. But after you get out towards the east, marginal deterrence falls down to a very low level. You get very little additional deterrence by increasing the severity of your penalty. This is where we think we are with respect to most offenses. And if this is right, it means it's mathematically impossible that we should cure the prison population problem through higher deterrence. Well, if deterrence won't do it, how about rehabilitation? After all, our prisons are usually called correctional institutions. And here, initially, the mathematics is in our favor. If all offenses were like the red bar there, which represents the 1.2% recidivism rate for homicide, that is, the percentage of offenders who recommit within 3 years, then rehabilitation would be a hopeless strategy for dealing with the prison population problem. But that's not the typical case. As the purple bar indicates, offenses overall are highly recidivist. In 1994, a study was done of all of the offenders who were released from prison that year. 272,000 prisoners were released. Those prisoners, prior to that incarceration, had accumulated a total of 4.1 million charges, criminal charges. And in the 3 years after their release, they committed an additional 744,000 offenses. The prison population problem is to a very large extent a recidivism problem. So rehabilitation looks like a possibility. Unfortunately, a meta-study was done in 1974 of rehabilitation studies, which concluded that no rehabilitation program in prison worked. This influenced criminology for over 2 decades, particularly correctional theory. In addition, there was an unholy alliance of the left, the center, and the right against rehabilitation. The left took rehabilitation to be naked social control of the poor. The liberals were concerned that rehabilitation programs in prison were linked to judicial discretion and then to disparate racial impacts. And the right didn't want to spend money coddling criminals. Fortunately, eventually some new studies were done, which showed that some things, in fact, did work. And chief among them was academic education in prisons. This is a graduation ceremony at Ironwood State Prison in California. College education in prison cuts recidivism dramatically. You might think, well, of course, the people who sign up for a college program and have what it takes to get through a college program are just those people who would have turned their lives around anyway. They were ready to be good people. And there is a strong selection effect of that sort. But it's easy to correct for statistically. And once you do that, it turns out that there's still a very strong negative correlation between college courses and recidivism. The correlation maintains itself even after you factor out income differences after release from prison. Apparently, college education just makes people better citizens. The founders of the liberal arts movement would not have been shocked at this. Here's some recidivism statistics from the college education program that's run in Texas. A study in Florida indicated that for every dollar spent in education costs for inmates who graduated in prison with a college degree, $3.53 was saved to the taxpayers of Florida in future prison costs. Well, in light of these sorts of statistics, and I would have to say, in fairness to the politicians I'm about to criticize, that not all of this data was as clear in 1994 as it is now, but it was pretty clear. And in 1994, President Clinton signed a Get Tough on Crime Act. One of its provisions eliminated the eligibility for Pell Grants for prison inmates. The effect of this was that only a handful of the 350 prison education programs survived. They had been in 45 states. They had been successful. But we saved the taxpayers 1/2 of 1% of the cost of the Pell program was saved by that legislation. Well, it's easy enough, I think, to see why a politician might not want to vote for education for prisoners, might not want to vote for anything for prisoners, right? Because if you do, in the next election, your opponent is very likely to run an attack ad. He may well, in fact, be able to find someone who went through the program that you voted for and went out and afterwards committed a horrible crime, right? The Willie Horton effect. Anecdotal evidence will beat evidence-based policy every time in a war of sound bites. Well, I'm going to leave it to the political scientist to figure out how we get our elected representatives to be more concerned about our interests than about their next election. As a philosopher, what I want to address are the arguments that might be given against education for prisoners in light of the fact that it looks like good policy. And I think there are two arguments that are worthy of consideration. Both of them are matters of desert. The first one is a matter of retributive desert, which is often listed as the fourth purpose of punishment. The argument goes like this. And let me say, I'm sympathetic to the basic idea behind this argument in a way. I don't think we can sacrifice justice for good consequences. And I really do think retributive justice is important. I think retributive justice is the reason that it's not moral to punish innocent people. I think retributive justice is the reason that there are upper limits on how much we can morally punish anybody. And I also think that this first premise is right. Offenders deserve, on the basis of what they've done, hard treatment. 2 is also okay. A college is a benefit, not hard treatment. I hope you agree. At least I hope you'll agree once midterms are over. This is a premise I think is false. I don't think a state is required to give offenders as nearly as possible exactly what they deserve. I think this argument mistakes the moral force of desert. The better football team deserves to win the game. But what if, because of unlucky bounces of the football, at the end of the game, the score is 9-7, and the worst team is ahead? Are the officials supposed to get together and award the game to the better team, even though it had the lower score? Or is desert not strong enough to have that effect? Somebody punches you in the nose. Person deserves to be punched back. But did Jesus have it completely wrong? Are we obligated to punch somebody back, or can we at least sometimes morally permissibly turn the other cheek? if something is deserved, it really is fitting. It is fitting for prisoners not to get the benefit of a college education. But that fittingness is just not enough to overcome the obligation of the state to protect us from crime, the obligation of the state to save tax money. Second argument is a distributive argument, a matter of distributive justice, and it goes like this. I think this is true. There are potential college students who have committed no offenses and who can't afford a college education. The innocent candidates are more deserving of funds for college than prison inmates. That's also true. Here, it's the conclusion that's a problem. It doesn't follow. This is not a valid argument, and this conclusion is false. There would be something fitting if we can't give the money to both, which would be the better thing to do, something fitting to give it to the innocent students, not the offenders. But we get more for our money if we give that money to the prison offenders. We get crime control. In fact, we will probably get the money back by smaller prison populations, and we can then spend that money at the taxpayer for those other needy students. So I conclude that although prisoners don't necessarily deserve it, and they don't deserve a college education as much as many other needy students do, nonetheless, we ought as a society to have a massive program investing in college education in our prisons. We should do this for the good of society, for the good of the offenders, and because of the high value of liberty. Thank you.